actually think the building of or building on the new sort of rational technical skills that we have always known is going to be that difficult. We're really, really good at that. Our IQ increases generation on generation. We're very good at thinking. We're very good at coming up with new ideas and building on the technical skill set that we've got. I think the areas where we may need to consider more and think more are around mindset and aligned behaviors. Mindset isn't something that we've actually, I don't think, a lot of time considering to this point. We've spent a lot of time in the value space, but I'm not sure we've spent a lot of time in the mindset space. One of the things that we are starting to understand now is the importance of mindset. At the end of the day, it's our thinking that drives our feelings and emotions. Those feelings and emotions then drive our behaviors. And mindset is something that we can mindlessly go along with, i.e. we are thinking lots of thoughts, but we're not realizing where they're taking us or the impact of those thoughts, whatever they may be. Or we can be very mindful about how we think and the mindset that we operate in. And Carol Dweck, I don't know whether you have read her book on mindset. It is definitely worth a read. She's done an amazing amount of research in this area. And one of the things that we are now starting to understand is that we can move ourselves from one mindset to another. So we can move ourselves from a problem-focused mindset, for example, to a solutions-focused mindset. We can actually put ourselves in a mindset where we are more open to innovation and ideas. The difficulty in the past, I think, is that we haven't had a language around it. Therefore, we've not been able to either identify it in ourselves, in others, or across our organisations. And with quite a lot of the work that's coming through now, we do have a language. The more we can talk about mindset, we can understand mindset, the more we can recognise when we're perhaps standing either individually or across a team or across an organisation in a mindset that's not serving us or not helping us. We can then consciously move from one to the other and support ourselves, our people and our organisations to do that. So I think there'll be a lot more work and understanding and knowledge coming through around the innovation mindset piece. I think also in the aligned values, yes, we have done a lot of work in the values space. I've seen so many organisations with those values printed on the walls. I've also seen them noted in the annual reports. When it comes to actually modelling the behaviour in practice every day, when it comes to actually really understanding what they mean in terms of how we operate and what we do, I'm not sure that's so ingrained. Enron, and I think we all know Enron, their values were respect and trust, I believe. So it kind of goes to show we can put them on the wall, but they don't necessarily come to life in real life. The values are going to be hugely important because without those values being brought to life, it's very difficult to collaborate, it's very difficult to build relationships, it's very difficult to cross boundaries, and all of these things in the world that we now operate, which is turned, I'm sure you're aware, but it is turned this VUCA world, which is very volatile, very uncertain, very complex, very ambiguous. It is going to be relationship and collaboration that digs down and releases that energy. At the end of the day, we are organisations, yes, we have our brands and we have our bricks and we have our mortar, but it isn't the logo that delivers the products and services. The logo and the brand might help sell ultimately the products and services from a reputational point of view, but it's every single individual that sits within that organisation that brings the ideas, that brings the energy, that brings the conversation, that creates the products and services that then are sold and shared around the globe. Underpinning those three things that I've got on there is this need to build trust and purpose. And again, these two things we've talked about a lot. I hear a lot of organisations talk about the need to build trust. It's definitely recognised. I'm not sure the requirement for trust to flourish is actually recognised clearly yet. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in terms of what does enhance and what actually destroys trust. Purpose is really important. In fact, I've been going around a number of organizations running focus groups recently, and they're really well-known brands. But when you get inside the organization, I regularly ask the question, so if I came in from out of space and asked you, what's the purpose? Why are you here? What's the big thing you're here to do? I get told often, well, we're running this project and we're doing that project and this is our strategy. And yes, I've got this to do and this is my day job. Yes, I know that, but where's the purpose? Where's the connection? Where's the heart? And actually, the response is usually some mumbled noises. The clarity is not there. And I think certainly the communication HR communities, we've got a big role to play there in terms of pushing that clarity and ensuring people really understand why they're coming and connecting with the organisation that they work for. So for me, if we're really going to be successful, if we're really going to drive sustainable business, we do have to know how to release this energy and how to build these relationships. So the energy element, certainly from a communication point of view, we do have a big responsibility around coherence and capacity. The human brain has a very limited capacity. We can't push hundreds of projects. I've been in organizations where they've got Excel spreadsheets of 130 live projects and they're wanting to communicate all of it. We can't absorb that capacity. So we need to be able to chunk it down so that we can absorb it, and it has to be consistent over time. And these are the skills that we're really good at, and we can really support leaders and managers and hold the mirror up to them when they're really eager to communicate the latest big thing, but haven't really thought through how it ladders back to that strategy and that overall overarching purpose. Because the more we shout, the more it's like a disco or a nightclub. In fact, I got laughed at the other day because they're not discos anymore, are they? They're raves, but it's more like a rave at 3 o'clock in the morning, just going boom, boom, boom. And nobody can hear it and nobody can make sense of it. And there is no way that we can release our intrinsic motivation and energy if we're just in this confused, noisy environment. The other side of it is relationships, and we are understanding a lot more about human behavior. We are beginning to understand that it all starts with a chemical reaction in the brain, and the more that we can bring that knowledge to bear, the more we can influence and impact and support really our leadership and our managers in what they're doing. So I'm going to talk you through a few of those now: threat and reward, social mindset and unconscious bias. And we will come back to this whole point of trust, because it's very difficult. In fact, it will be nigh on impossible for organizations in the future that are working in this collaboration age to do what they want to do if they do not have this underpin of trust. So to be able to do it, we need to understand it. So I just want to talk you through change very quickly, because again, I think this is quite impactful. We're all going through change. I don't think there's an organisation that isn't. It's not just one after the other, it's layer on layer. And actually, dependent on how it's handled and managed, that has a lot to do with our leadership. It also has a lot to do with HR, L&D and communication. Dependent on how that is managed, the individuals that are experiencing change will either see it as a threat or see it as a challenge. If they see it as a threat, it's usually because they're confused. It's because there is no consistency. There's very little certainty. The feedback that they're getting may be ad hoc. The challenges that they're experiencing may be so great that they just can't contemplate them. What happens then is that there is a huge release of cortisol and adrenaline in the human body, which is effectively the stress response. If we have a very big stress response, it takes us towards distress. When we are in that state as human beings, it has a very negative impact on how we perform. So our ability to think reduces practically to nothing. We become very emotional. We're absolutely not capable of being creative or innovative. And our peripheral vision, if you like, narrows right down. So we're very adverse to, we don't want to collaborate or put ourselves out there. We just want a safe space to hide. It also has a huge impact on ourselves. We become physically ill and we also become mentally ill. If we position change as a challenge, whereby the communications are clearer, people are being heard, there's plenty of opportunity for feedback, there's plenty of opportunity and time for discussion and debate, there's regular performance reviews, the challenges are there, but they're not so overwhelming that they're threatening, then we do get a boost of adrenaline and cortisol, but it's manageable. It's called eustress, eustress. And actually it's good stress because we all need some to get out of bed. So if we have that, then actually we do think better, we perform better, and we're more creative. Now, when I go into organizations and we're talking through this chart, they'll quite often point to me and say, well, of course, we're in the yellow bit, we're in the green line, that's where we are. Really? Yes. And it's interesting because when you probe down, you'll know, I'm sure, that the number of stress-related cases, people taking sickness leave from organizations, is increasing rapidly. Stress is due to overtake heart disease as one of the biggest causes of ill health. And the easiest and quickest way to identify where your organization sits is to look at your own sick-related days off, stress-related illness levels and figures. And if they're quite high, then I would suggest you're more in red. If you're more in that red road, if you like, then the organization that you're in can't achieve what the organizations are saying they want to achieve, which is this innovation, creativity, and being able to deliver the services and products to stay relevant in the world that we're currently in. It's more or less impossible. Now, I've had some people say to me, oh, that's fine, but actually we push quite hard and our organization works brilliantly. Yes, okay. If you want to put people under a lot of pressure and stress, they will perform well for a short period of time, because if you frighten them to death, they will do it out of fear. But over the medium to long term, so if you're looking to develop a medium to long term sustainable business, it does not work. And all of the stats and the research is there now to back that up. So moving on, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, how do we improve employee engagement? I think David Rock has actually got a really good statement. He tends to refer to it as, it's not so much about improving employee engagement as managing disengagement. If we can manage disengagement, engagement will go up. And actually, it's quite hard to manage disengagement. So one of the things that we now know is that the brain works to this principle of to this principle of threat and reward. So as a human being, we are at any point in a state of threat, in a state of reward, or somewhere in the middle. When we're in threat, we're more down in that red road that I showed you, and when we're in reward toward, we're more in the, I think it was green, I keep saying yellow, in the green road. The difficulty or the challenge around this threat and reward response is that as human beings, we always see 5 times as many threats as we do reward. So we're much easier to push it into the threat state than we are to push into the reward state. And that's good to know and something to be considered when we're putting together our communications and our HR activities. It is very easy to make people feel very threatened, and that's not where we want them to be. And we have to think very carefully about how we can calm that emotional stress response so that we don't impact negatively all the good things that we're wanting from our fantastic people in terms of ideas and thoughts. Now, David Rock has come up with a model, because to make it simple, they did a lot of analysis, and what they found was that there were 5 domains, whereas humans, we are particularly susceptible to this threat and reward response. And those domains are there. I won't go into them in a lot of detail. I'll just give you an oversight so that you're aware, but it is something to perhaps find out more about or talk about amongst with your peers at the awards. So these 5 domains are status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And what he is saying is that if we negatively impact any of those 5 domains, we're likely, well, we are likely, we will push people towards this away response. So when we're planning our activity, if we know that we're going to impact somebody's status, and by status, I don't mean job title, I mean how people feel about themselves. So if you ignore somebody, if you don't invite somebody to a meeting that should be there, if you move somebody's office from a good location to a bad one, you'll affect their, if you make somebody redundant, you'll impact their status. Certainty we all know about. If you make people feel very uncertain, if you're not giving them knowledge, you'll impact that negatively. Autonomy, we all like to be in control. If you tell me what to do and I have no say whatsoever, you will negatively impact me. Relatedness we'll come back to, very important. Do I feel as though you have some empathy for me? Do we have a social connection? If that's not there, you'll push me towards away. And fairness, if I don't feel what you're saying to me is fair, it's not fair. You might think it's fair, but if I don't, it's not fair. And what we're saying here is that if in our planning, we know that we're going to negatively impact somebody's status and sense of certainty, then we have to upweight autonomy, relatedness and fairness significantly to counterbalance it. Because if we don't, then we're going to push people into that away state. And if they're in that away state, all of the creativity, the thinking, the listening, the relatedness, the connectedness has all switched off. So it's I find this quite a useful model to work with, understanding the principle of threat and reward and keeping these 5 domains in mind, because it's 5 to 1. It is so easy to push people away, and actually we need them to come close. And a lot of organizations, when you get into them and start looking at what's actually happening, not just in terms of the changes and the processes, but in terms of the language that's used, you know, things that are really quite simple day-to-day activities, the feedback and how it's given, all of these things can push people towards away, and they're all things that we can change, some quite easily and some obviously over the longer term. So I would like to also just talk about this importance of social. We kind of understand the concepts now of, you know, the emotional self and the rational self. But again, one of the things, and Matt Lieberman has done a lot of work on this, he's just brought a book out called Social, really worth a read. We are social beings. Social isn't just a nice thing. It's really important to us to connect with others. It's really important to us to be part of a group. And it comes back from our evolutionary history. If we were isolated and on our own, we were killed. If people didn't share their food with us, we died. So this social necessity, if you like, is really important. So much so that they are now suggesting, in fact, more than suggesting, I think it probably will happen at some point when they change the documentation, but they are suggesting that we change Maslow's triangle. At the moment, the need for social interaction is in the middle of that triangle. Matt Lieberman and et al. Are basically saying that it is so important to our sense of who we are and our well-being, happiness and health, that social needs to be on the bottom of the triangle alongside food and water. What does this mean for our organizations? It means that if we have strong social connections, if we can harbor and encourage people to share and to communicate and to play, if you like, to some extent, then actually we can build resilience into our organization that protects when we are going through change-oriented times. And I've got a really good example of this in that I was doing some work for Sab Miller, which is the beer company, and they were taken over by InBev. And for the takeover, it meant that the head office in London was going to be closed down. There were about 350 people in the head office, and it was a year from when they were told to when the office was going to be closed down. But they didn't want those 350 people to leave because they had some important work to do for the transition. And the Sab Miller leadership were quite people-oriented, actually. And what they said was, look, we can't do anything about the fact that we're being taken over and that these people are going to lose their jobs. What we can do, though, is make this last year really good for them. So we can put on more social activities than we've done before. So they ran quiz nights. They put a football table in the canteen. They paid for additional training that people wanted to do. The leaders made themselves a lot more visible. And it was interesting because they didn't do it because they thought it would make a difference. They just did it because they cared. And it was only when we got to the end of the year and we did an employee engagement survey, and this was the last employee engagement survey was about 6 weeks before that office closed down, and the employee engagement scores were the highest they'd ever been. And everybody sat back and just went, wow, that's amazing. And it was amazing because that sense of social, that sense of we're in it together, we can talk, we're being supported, we trust each other, made a huge difference to that whole experience and made it something that wasn't threatening, and that actually they performed better, and the engagement levels, as I say, were better than they had been or were ever expected to be. So that social element is important. And again, it's something that from an HR learning and development comms point of view, we've got a big role to play in that, not just in what we do, but in educating our leaders and managers in terms of what they need to do. Mindset has been shown from the research to be the one thing that can identify persistence and grit in the face of change, i.e. the mindset that you're in will predict how resilient you are to change. So understanding it, bringing it out into the open, and as I said earlier, being able to have a language around it is quite important. And it's something that is easy to do, actually, once you understand it. And I know from the workshops that I've been doing with managers and leaders over here, they're really interested in this stuff. It's really fascinating, actually. I suppose as a group, and also us as professionals, we've been talking about emotional intelligence and how to improve performance for quite some time now. And some aspects of it, particularly around the emotional intelligence piece, have been difficult to grasp. We can read about them, but they're just difficult to grasp and put into practice. I think the most exciting thing for me around the neuroscience is that it's giving us the tools and the language that actually allows people who are rational. I mean, they have to be rational to do their jobs, but it's allowing the individuals with very rational brains to really understand these concepts and understand what they need to do personally to be able to make steps forward. And the mindset conversation is a fascinating one. I've actually sat in meetings, and Carol Dweck refers to it as fixed and growth mindset. So if you have a fixed mindset, you're very focused on proving yourself, you don't like feedback, talent is innate, you're fantastic. It's very much I'm the hero of the day, not helpful in an organizational setting. Growth feedback is much more focused on continual learning, proving yourself. We work as a team. But we do fluctuate between the two. We have a propensity for one or the other, but when you know, you can identify and move yourself out of fixed into growth. And I have sat in meetings where the language has been, I think that's a very fixed mindset approach you're taking there. Should we try and step into growth for a minute? And it's fascinating because it takes the anger and the upset out of what could be a difficult conversation and allows people to move on and forward. So I think mindset's very important. I'm conscious of time. I am keeping an eye on it. So trust. I do want to just, and I'm not going to bamboozle you with a lot of neuroscience, but I would just like you to kind of get an understanding of the broad concept of this. And this is work by Paul Zak. He's written a book called The Miracle Molecule, and he has done an enormous amount of work on trust and empathy and oxytocin and the links between. And essentially, what he has, I wouldn't say proved, I mean, I don't think scientists would ever say they prove anything, but what we know at the minute is that oxytocin levels and oxytocin production in humans is directly linked to trust. And actually, if you don't have oxytocin, you can't have trust. And what I mean by that is oxytocin, as you may know, is the bonding hormone and neurotransmitter, and it is the chemical that is released in large quantities when females give birth. It's sort of for the connection between baby and mother. It's also the chemical that is released when we smile at somebody. It's the chemical that's released when somebody spontaneously gives us a bunch of flowers or takes us out on an event or whatever that wasn't expected. So we all have it. And when oxytocin is released and when it surges, it releases two other neurotransmitters, dopamine, which is the reward transmitter, which takes us more towards that reward space, and serotonin, which impacts our mood. And this cocktail, if you like, of neurotransmitters that are sending signals around our brains, when they are operating and when they're present, they actually improve our levels of empathy. They make us much more empathetic. It is very difficult to show empathy or be empathetic if you don't have any oxytocin. In fact, when the oxytocin receptors are missing, there is no empathy. Empathy drives our morality, if you like. It enables us to make judgments and to be considerate and so on and so forth, which then drives levels of trust. So oxytocin, if you remember back to my challenge and threat diagram earlier, oxytocin is destroyed, it's taken away by cortisol, which is released when we're stressed. So what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is that when we have a highly stressful work environment, the neurotransmitters in our brain, for example, oxytocin, reduce considerably. Without oxytocin, we don't have the empathy. Without the empathy, you can't create trust. So having a very toxic, if you like, work environment and saying, but we're going to build our trust, there's no point looking at trust until we've looked at the things that are driving that very high stress environment. The trust goes hand in hand with the chemicals, if you like, that are going on in our brain. So it was just to give you an idea, because we all talk about trust, but it's oxytocin that people, particularly Paul Zak, is saying now is the chemical signature that underpins it, and it's just useful to understand that interplay. And finally, before I sum up, I did want to touch on unconscious bias. There's a lot of work that's going on in this area, and I know there's a lot of focus on the importance of diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion, absolutely essential. If you think of humans for a minute as brains on sticks and nothing else, each brain has its own mental map. If you put all of those brains on sticks from the same education, the same background, the same culture together in a room, they will come up with what they've always come up with. If you bring in brains on sticks with different mental maps based on different education, different cultures, different religions, different countries, they come together, they clash constructively, and out of that comes new ideas. So if you're wanting innovation, which everybody says they want, the more diversity and inclusion you have, the more innovation you will generate or you will be able to propagate. What we also know is that we have many unconscious biases, about 150 altogether. They have been chunked down to about 5 groupings, but there are quite a few of them. The interesting thing is they're unconscious, so we don't know we've got them. We can't see them, we don't know we've got them. We can educate ourselves about them. One of the things that we have learned, though, is that education doesn't change the bias. It makes us much more aware about unconscious bias, and we need that, so it's important. In fact, the more we educate people about unconscious bias, the more we can see bias in other people. We still can't see it in ourselves, though. So education doesn't necessarily do the whole job. So we have to put, from an organizational point of view, processes and procedures in place that support the mitigation of bias. So the way that I would bring that to life is for recruitment, for example. If we are recruiting people, you should take the photograph, take the name off. In fact, you're better putting it through an algorithm, all the CVs, pull out the CVs that have got the skills that you want. They have absolutely no bias attached to them. And if you're then going to interview, you don't interview 2 on the phone and 1 face-to-face, because otherwise you bring in the situational bias. So the face-to-face will be positively biased before you've started. Everybody goes through the same process and you work to panel. And that's the best way. So you put processes in place to mitigate the bias. And just to bring that to life, if you look at your screens now, you'll see A and B. I'm sure some of you may have seen this. Those two squares look different colours, I'm assuming to you. So the A is dark grey, the B is light grey. Now, if you look at the next slide, if I put the ladder, if you like, over the top, they now look the same. They actually are the same, and they have done this analysis down to the pixels on computers. They are the same. They look different because of the positioning of that green tube. So it's a light and space trick to the eye, if you like. Now, you know now, because I've now explained, that they are the same. But if I go back, they still look different. And that's how unconscious bias works. So I've trained you, if you like, that they're the same, but we can't see it. We're aware, but we can't see it. So it's just interesting, again, to keep that in mind. So what does all this mean for communication and for engagement, actually? I'll just quickly run through this. Focus on connection. For me, it's all about connection. How can we enhance connection? And we've got some great tools now, social tools, used correctly, aligned to a strategy and thought through, very beneficial for that around an organisation. Let's focus on social. And it's not just about happy clappy. It is literally about bringing people together through those social connections, because it does build resilience in the face of change, and we're all facing change. I think feedback's really important. I haven't got time to go into this in a lot of detail now, but feedback's quite interesting. It's better to create a culture of asking for feedback regularly than giving feedback. Because if we give feedback, you kind of activate the threat response, both in the giver and the receiver. Giver is uncomfortable, I don't want to offend them. Receiver doesn't like it, why are you telling me this? Whereas if we have a culture of asking for feedback, I've just done this presentation, how did it go? Was it all right? What can I focus on to make it better? I'm comfortable because I've asked for it, so I have no threat. You're comfortable because I've given you permission, because I want to learn. It comes back to continuous learning. I want to learn and move on. So feedback's really interesting. Connect with the why is all about purpose. We're great at telling the stories. Don't forget the story. Stories light up all areas of the brain. PowerPoints light up reasoning and language only, so it's two areas effectively. So stories are great, and the education bit I think is really important, because our leaders and managers, they haven't got time to do the research around this. They're really hungry for it, but they haven't got time. And in our roles, we should make the time so that when we're in front of them and with them, we can be their guides. We can help them grow and develop, because they deserve to grow and develop. They all want to, and we can really help them be all that they want to be. And I think that's the most exciting piece around what we're doing now, and the learning that's coming through. It's giving us a lot more to be able to support our organisations, leaders and managers to be really everything they've said they wanted to be, but they found quite difficult to achieve. So, yeah.
Okay. I think there is something here which is saying stories is a powerful medium to drive messages. Do you think video stories work better than text stories?
Now that's an interesting one, actually. Now it depends when you communicate with video. So one of the things that is coming through is that we really do like video, because we like the visual element of it. But if you're using video in the very, very first instance, it's not as effective. So if you're sorry, let me start again. If you're communicating something that is completely brand new, that people haven't heard before, then video is not as effective. It's definitely better than text, but it's not as effective as the face-to-face discussion and debate. So you should always have the face-to-face discussion and debate, even if it's over a webinar or a video call, then sending out a cold video. If once that first step has been done, video is really, really effective as a medium, because it lights up lots of different regions in the brain. Obviously, it depends on the technology that you've got, and whether people have got the sound cards and the little circle doesn't go round. But provided that's in play, then yes, video is a very powerful tool, and it's certainly better than a lot of dense text. In fact, I was in, we have to be so careful with text. I was in an organisation the other day, and their communications team spend ages putting together the communications for the chief executive that then go out across the entire organisation. And it goes out as an email, and it goes out to everybody. And when I was running the focus groups, the feedback that was coming back was, why do they keep sending us these emails? So I was probing it, and what was coming, they're so dense. It's 2.5, it's like, well, a side of A4, side and a half of A4, lots of acronyms, lots of detailed content that we don't understand. We just get the email. So what do? We read the first 2 lines and delete. And that's been pretty much across all the focus groups that I've been in. So with the text, as much as the leaders like to spend ages mulling over every word, I know because I've been there, a sentence, and think it all through, just remember the audience that you're talking to, the time that they've got, particularly call centres. You know, they have 15-minute buzz sessions twice a week, and they don't have time given to read. They're not going to spend all that time trying to work out what an acronym means. They'll just delete. So I think we have to be careful with text. Yes, video is more effective than text, but you have to think about what the message is and when you're going to communicate, because if you're communicating something that's going to activate that threat response, you're better doing it through the manager line and through the group and team discussion and debate. That means that the managers have got to be equipped, trained, supported, and understand their role and the communication element, the people element of their role in their leadership title. And it still surprises me how many don't, actually. And that's not their fault. They've just never really had it articulated clearly.
Right.
It was a bit of a long way of question.
Right. Thanks for that. We have one more here. It's from Sneha Rika, and she's saying, I'm a part of an EPC organization and our employees work in remote locations, such as in hills, in valleys, in forests, etc., laying transmission lines. What do you think will be an effective mode of communication to them?
Well, I don't know what access they would have. Sorry, thank you. I was halfway through giving the previous answer, and I thought maybe I was taking it a bit too wide. But it depends how you can. I don't know how you can reach them. So do they have access to mobile? If they have access to mobile phones, and some do. If it's really remote, they might not. But if they have access to mobile phones, I think probably the best way of reaching them would be over mobile through a cloud system. You're not going to be able to get them through internet or web access or anything like that. If otherwise, I guess it would need to be the written communication, I'm assuming. I don't really know. The reason I'm struggling is I'm not quite sure how often you are in touch with them, whether they're out of contact completely for 2 or 3 weeks, or whether it's a couple of hours, or whether they have access to mobile.
Okay, so she's responded and she's saying that they do have access to mobile phones and they do not have any other access. In fact, network is also poor, so essentially it's limited access by phone.
Right, okay. Then you probably have to, we could perhaps take this offline actually, because there's more questions that I need to ask before we give an example. But if they're working in remote areas and they're working relatively close to each other, then maybe you could bring them together. There's a potential to bring them together, even if it's just once every couple of months or once a month, to be able to talk through some of the activities. Or maybe you would need to do it around written form. But if there's any way you could get them face to face, and there's a person that you could send the communication to that is actually then responsible for disseminating it in that area. So you set up almost a series of communication champions, but it's difficult when I don't know the ins and outs to give you a fair answer on that.
Yes. All right, sure. So, I have a question, and, meanwhile, Sneharika, did you want to respond? Okay, she's more.
Can I
Deborah,
ask
I had a question for you. And
no, this is Shruti.
Who is this, please?
This
Can you
is
identify yourself and then ask the question?
Yeah, this is Shruti from Swaraj.
Please go ahead.
Actually, Deborah, you talked about the social part of the communication.
Yeah.
I would like to know, there are so many channels now, like we have WhatsApp, apps like Team, and then there will come. So is the idea for an organization to stick using one out of this plethora of the communication, maybe one or two selectively, because it's difficult for an employee to keep a tab of everything.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, and I think the number would come out of the strategy in my mind. So I think what's happened because these social tools are really so without really thinking through the strategy that sits behind it or what they're there to do. So I think before deciding on whether you want one or two or three or whatever it happens to be, it's almost like taking a step back and trying to understand what we're trying to do as an organization from a business point of view. What does that therefore mean in terms of our employees and what they need to know, and how do we cultivate this trust and the social aspects, and then what are the best tools and channels for that. Now it might be, because I do know this is the case sometimes, that for one organization the response to that is to have one or two tools and that's it. It might be in other organizations where you've got very different audience populations that actually you have different tools in different areas, but you know exactly what they're there for, and you know the purpose, and you know what you're communicating through which, if that makes sense. Trial and error, and I think too much of the social media has been sort of implemented without enough thought, really. And yes, that's when you get they then sort of grow like mushrooms. So it's just doing an audit and being very clear on what the purpose is and what you're trying to get out of it, and then that will drive which ones are appropriate, how many, and how you take it forward. And that may vary organization to organization.
Okay, great. Thanks, Deborah, for that.
Thank you. Can I ask
A question which I wanted to ask. The question is around, my question is around communication and authenticity. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when organizations attempt to communicate to employees, it's normally a rhetoric, same thing that's being presented. There's some lofty words and lofty sort of statements that people don't see play out in real life. I wanted you to reflect on some of the advice that you might be giving your consultants, your clients around authenticity in communication.
Authenticity is really important because people smell people who are not authentic from a long way, and it travels very quickly. So this link between say do is really key. So if we are saying from a strategic point of view or a positioning point of view that we're going to do X, behave in a certain way, we expect Y, etc., then this comes back to the leader manager. The leader manager groups have to live and breathe that. They really have to live and breathe that, because if they don't, it creates a conflict across the organization and confusion across the organization, which again drives people down that threat route. So one of the things that I do say, and spend quite a lot of time with senior teams, is to take them, again, it's going back a bit, take them back a step, say, look, when you're talking about this, do you really mean that? What do you expect to see, and how are you going to change your behavior, or how does your behavior align with it? Because if it doesn't, nobody's going to believe it. They will believe the behavior before the words, always, as we always do. So that alignment, which ultimately drives the authenticity, is really key. And that comes back to managers, leaders really understanding. Again, I've stood in front of a lot of leaders. We say to them, do you realize how powerful you are? You're really powerful. What you do, people will copy instantly. And actually, if you're saying that you believe in a respectful environment and you keep turning up 15 minutes late for business or for a meeting, that's disrespectful. The two things don't align. So if you want to stick with respect, that's fine, stick with it, but be on time. If you don't want to be on time, because that's the way your organization works, because you're a bit more laid back, let's drop it. It's an example to make the point. But you have to almost go or to work out what alignment is and what it is you're actually standing for. And when it comes through authenticity in word, when people are standing up presenting, I get asked this a lot. When we're presenting, do we have to come across as funny? If you're not funny, no. Authenticity isn't about being something that you're not. It's about being the best of who you are. So pick up on your strengths and play to those. Don't copy somebody on YouTube that look like a comedian, because it'll come across as inauthentic. So yes, it's really important. It's something that quite regularly gets missed, and it's something I think it'll come into play more so as we move through this connection age, because you can't avoid it. If we really want to build these trusting environments, if we're really wanting to grow relationship.
Right. Thanks for that response. I'm just mindful, Deborah, we're at 5 p.m. right now. And I'm sure we've diarized this for 1 hour for everyone, so I don't want to exceed the time. But I want to thank you profusely on behalf of everyone who's on this webinar and the LNOD Roundtable. You did such a great job. Thank you so much for all the elaborate answers to the questions as well, and a very insightful webinar. So thank you for that, and thank you everyone for logging in today. I just want to repeat one more time. Deborah runs a company called Minerva Engagement that's based out of London, and she was delivering this webinar to us from London. She's speaking to an Indian audience for the first time, so I must really congratulate you. This was fabulous, and I'm hoping to have you here in person soon to be able to talk to a group of people from here. Very quickly, for all of you who are on this call, thank you for being on board. One more time, this webinar was conducted in the context of the Mega Corporate Film Festival and Awards that's coming up on the 24th of October. We're delighted to see you all there in person. Your passion for communication is apparent from the fact that you logged in the middle of a work day to be able to listen to Deborah here today. I must say it's an opportunity, and those who've not managed to do it have really missed an outstanding and insightful learning opportunity today. So quickly, if you want to register for the MCAFF, LNOD Roundtable at outlook.com. Please send in your names. If you're a member, you have huge discounts to be able to attend. If you're from a winning organization, you have more opportunities to be able to attend this. Contact Udaya at 996758355 or Pooja at 704583867. Thank you, everyone. We're signing off on this webinar. Thanks for being on board. Deborah, one more time, thank you ever so much for doing this for us.
Oh, I've really enjoyed being with you. Thank you for inviting me on.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody, and see you all at the Mega Corporate Film Festival and Awards. And Deborah, see you in India soon.
So take care. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.